This is The Convergence.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to The Convergence, where every week we talk about Web 3.0 and the convergence into sustainability. How can we solve the world's global problems with all this great new technology that's out there? I'm excited this week because we're going to really talk sustainability. We're going to talk about emissions trading. We're going to talk about carbon credits, something I've mentioned in almost every episode. But today I'm fortunate enough that I have the experts. I have Jack and Shawn, both from GHG Emissions, with me today. And actually, they're a partner of my sponsor of this show, Evergreen Carbon Credits. So I want to welcome you both from the cold north of Canada. Is that right?
Yeah, just north of the border. Thanks for having us on here.
Yeah. What is the temperature there today? Just so that I can compare it to the 96 degrees it is here in Tempe, Arizona.
Don't rub it. Yeah.
It's not Celsius though. It's Fahrenheit at 96.
It's on 65 here today. It's not too bad.
Okay. All right. That's pretty good. Well, I want to welcome you both. And I know we had a great conversation the other day and chatted a little bit about your background and how y'all got into emissions trading and carbon credits. And maybe Shawn, do you want to give us like a little bit of a summary? And then Jack, I'd love for you to do that deep dive like we did the other day and talk about the history and the origin of everything. Shawn, you want to go first? Tell us a little bit about GHG emissions.
Yeah, so GHG Emissions was created over a decade ago. Jack was the original founder, and he had a lot of foresight. He was about a decade early on some of this stuff, but as the market's evolving now, it's early turning into something. So GHG was created simply to promote green projects, to create carbon credits, to assist companies with becoming more green, where we could go in and do a feasibility study. How do you operate on a green passport, for lack of a better term? So,
sure.
That's the whole mind why it was created. Yeah.
And are the customers municipalities? Are they corporations? Are they individuals? How does that usually work? What do you usually see?
Customers can be anything. Typically, it's not an individual, but it would be an entity, typically a corporate entity. But governments, say a municipality, or in the U.S., a state or a county district, can actually say, hey, listen, can you come take a look at how we do business? And is there any way that we can do business in a more sustainable manner? And whether or not that would create a carbon credit is just about neither here nor there. You would have a starting point to say, hey, listen, in your normal course of business, you have this big of a footprint. And once you have that, you basically have a starting point to kind of go in whichever direction you want. Like, what are some things we can do to reduce your footprint? Is there any way that you can have a project, say you're a municipality, where you'd be able to generate some carbon offsets, for example?
I mean, let me just interrupt for a second, just so that the audience understands. I mean, a carbon offset is really just that. It's essentially saying that in the normal course of doing business, I produce this much baseline pollution, and I want to do things that can reduce that, but there's always going to be a portion of my business that maybe I can't do that with. So I'm going to offset that footprint by buying a carbon credit that is a certified product that you can be assured goes back to that original project, right? It's growing, reforestation of the Amazon. It's hemp farming. It's projects, other projects out there that somebody else is doing that are offsetting what you're putting into the environment. And if you think about it, we're a global environment, right? If you pollute across the border, you Canadians up there, all your pollution, pushing it down here to the Americas. But understanding it as an entire system and recognizing that reducing it someplace else actually has an effect here.
Yeah, I would actually explain it in a very simple way. So imagine you're driving your car, a combustible engine car, and as you drive, you emit carbon. And so over time, you'll emit one ton of carbon eventually. Sure. Now, so that would be your footprint of driving your car X miles. You now have put a ton of carbon in the atmosphere, and you nailed it exactly right. We would go out somewhere else, and one of these examples is a farmer, for example. If you could say, if a farmer was planning to do whatever, plant a field of soybeans, but this season he said, you know what, I'm going to summer fall that field. We have enough production in other areas. So we're actually not going to grow it, even though we have the capability to, but we have enough production elsewhere. So we're now not going to use the seeder. We're not going to use the combine. We're not going to use the baler. We're not going to use those things. So what they're doing is they're acting in a very sustainable manner. Instead of just maximizing their output, they're creating a bit of a balancing act to say, hey, listen, how do we get an acceptable level of output, but at the same time, try to reduce carbon. So
that's interesting. And I hadn't really thought about that. We always think about it's like somebody planting a tree on your behalf, but it could be somebody not doing something as well.
Exactly.
Them not polluting and when they planned on doing it. And that, so that's interesting. All right, Jack, you're on the hot seat here. Tell us your history with this. You've been doing this for a long time.
Yes, I have. Actually, the Alberta government actually in Canada and in a way also in the United States was one of the pioneers in carbon emission reduction programs. And they actually got started around 2004 and 2005, where they started talking about it and trying to figure out how to turn around and create protocols, which industry would be best started to reduce carbon. And they started doing that in, like I said, in 2004, 2005. Now, it takes a long time because there's the scientists have to turn around and put together, and because it's not business as usual, it's additionality. So you can't conduct any business as normal and expect to get carbon credits. You have to change how you are doing business. And then the difference between what is the norm or baseline and how you are presently doing business, and that difference is the amount of credits that you can create. And one carbon credit or offset, and people use those two terms interchangeably, and they really shouldn't, because they are two totally different things. But
please explain that. That would be really interesting. I've been in the environmental business since 2007, and I didn't know there was a difference. So please.
There is. The carbon credit is what is created, and you use that carbon credit to offset somebody else's footprint.
I see. That makes sense.
So although they are the same, they're not, but it's a minor difference. But some people really hate the term that is created is a carbon offset. It's not. A carbon credit is what is created. That is equivalent to 1 ton of CO2 that is reduced from the atmosphere. Now, there is more than just carbon dioxide as a gas that goes into the atmosphere. There's methane, there's all different kinds, but they rate them accordingly back down so that it's all common to one gas, and that is CO2. So you take
Jack,
methane.
can you explain that? What is a ton in the? I think people are thinking this is a 2,000. This is in the back of a pickup truck. It's a half a ton pickup truck. 2 of those.
So a ton is used interchangeably, and it's really not a ton. It's a ton. So it's a metric measurement. Okay.
Interesting.
And so you create a protocol. That protocol has to go through an extensive process to make sure that the science behind it is valid. When it is approved, it can be used by any particular jurisdiction, and which therefore creates mandatory and voluntary markets. And there is a big difference between mandatory and voluntary markets as well. But before any organization can say, okay, we are emitting so many tons, they have to have a clean air and water assessment, or how they determine what their emission structure is. And then in a lot of cases, the government gives them a quota. And this happens in a mandatory system. They're given a quota. So let's just say the quota is 50,000 tons a year. And it's by site, because a lot of emitters have multiple sites across the country. So it's not in total, it's site by site, including their head office. So in order for and everything over the 50,000 tons, and I'm just using that as an example, they have to pay a penalty for every ton of emissions that they emit into the atmosphere.
In Canada, they call it a carbon tax.
Yeah, carbon tax. We've heard that term, right?
You know, governments don't like you calling it a carbon tax.
Well, voters don't like being called a carbon tax. That's why, right?
You know, at least the Alberta government got, they were right, because in one sense of the way, it wasn't a tax. And you got to understand that in a lot of cases, the government did not get any money at all from the carbon credits.
Right.
Okay.
It was a trade system between businesses, right?
It was a trade system between businesses. So to use Shawn's analogy of a farmer, if a farmer was able to turn around and create carbon credits, he could go out and sell those carbon credits to the emitter. The government never got 1 cent of that.
Yeah. And
so the let's just use a figure of when it first got started of $15. Yeah. So if they had to go pay the government the $15 per ton of emissions, and they could go out to a farmer and pay the farmer $10 a ton, guess where
all
he
day
would
long.
go? All day long.
Sure.
And then he used those tons for his emissions quota. Yes. And so the farmer gave the farmer an additional source of revenue and incentive to change his farming practices. The government won because they were initiating a reduction system.
Yep.
And the farmer won because he got an additional source of revenue.
So I want to talk with you for a few moments about Evergreen Carbon Credits, one of the sponsors of this show. I started working with Evergreen when I was telling a friend of mine who's involved with that company about my efforts to try to learn more about blockchain, NFTs, crypto, all the things in this space. And he showed me Evergreen. Evergreen was a really unique solution. I've looked at carbon credits in the past. I've been in the sustainability industry for almost 15 years. I understood what they were. You were buying an offset to offset the carbon footprint that you or your company has. But I also understood the challenges with that. They're sold in very, very large blocks, and then people break those blocks up and try to sell individual credits or small clusters of credits to businesses. And that creates some room for fraud, for people to not be up and up on what that project is, if that carbon credit is real. And there's challenges with that. And you can Google it right now and find there's a big case in Europe going on about fraudulent carbon credits. But what Evergreen did, I thought, was really unique. They took this idea of NFTs and they took blocks of carbon credits and broke those things down into tens of thousands or even millions of individual carbon credits. They can actually fraction those even out to 1/10 of a carbon credit if they needed to. And they were able to then create a smart contract around that carbon credit so that you can track it back to its origin. You can find out what project it was associated with, but you are also guaranteed that the carbon credits you're getting from Evergreen are the real deal. You get that certificate, you get that certification that only the blockchain can do. So that's why it made sense for them to come on as a sponsor of this show. We're talking about all this new technology, and with new technology comes higher energy usages in some senses. And Evergreen is here to help offset that. If you want to look to maybe improve your image in the marketplace, maybe you're looking to offset some of your carbon footprint, not even just for your image, but actually for the sake of the planet. head on over to evergreencarboncredits.com and check out what they do. You can buy credits for as little as $11, and you'll get the certificate and the NFT that you can put in your wallet that shows that you've actually made that contribution. And that money, particularly right now with the projects they're working on, is going to reforestation in the Amazon. I think that's something we can all really get behind, particularly when we understand that the environment, the climate we're all connected to it. It doesn't matter if we're putting off emissions here in the US or if it's happening in Mexico. It all contributes to the same global problem. So why not be part of a global solution with Evergreen Carbon Credits? Jack, let me jump in here for a second, because I think it's important. And I've been working in the sustainability field since 2006, 2007. And I got to see some of the history of this sort of emissions trading. And a lot of people don't know that actually George H.W. Bush, some people consider him the father of emissions trading. And in the US at that time, if you grew up in the 80s, if you're a child of the 80s, you probably remember acid rain. It was something that was talked about in schools. Correct. And it was always this terrifying thing of, you're going to walk outside and you'll be skeleton. Yeah, you'll be skeletonized by this. But what I like that what George H.W. Bush did is he went to the Republican Party and he said, I've got an idea. What if we take capitalism and apply it to the environmental market? And he came up with this concept of emissions trading, exactly what you just talked about. He said to the industries that were producing acid rain, okay, if you're going to pollute, here's your cap. And anybody who, and anything over that cap, you're going to have to pay a fine. And every year we're going to reduce the cap. But if you have extra left over between what you actually did and the cap, you can sell that to other people. It was a capitalistic solution to an environmental problem. And the Republicans thought this was the most brilliant thing ever. I don't understand how 5 years later they were so opposed to it, but it was a really great idea of saying, look, there could be a limitation on your business and you just can't. So if somebody else wants to innovate, I'm going to pay them to innovate on my behalf. It's truly a beautiful capitalistic system. I know much of our audience is in the US and I know you're investors, so I have to swing it back to capitalism. This is a really, really good thing.
You're right on. It's all based on not business as usual.
Right.
So those protocols are in constant flux because what was the baseline? I'm just going to pick out of the air, 2004, and now all of a sudden you are moving along. Well, guess what? The norm in 2007 now is different, so the protocol has to be different. You can't continue to do that. So now you have to change your practice again. So it's constantly changing in order to turn around and create additional carbon credits.
I love it. I want to give another little explanation here, because anybody who knows me and has listened to my things understands I'm pretty libertarian in my approach to things. And this is truly cap and trade. I've spoke at the Libertarian Convention a couple of years ago for the Libertarian Party here in the US. And I talked about cap and trade. And I said, look, one of the things that libertarian philosophy and capitalist philosophy talks about is the idea of the commons, right? There are assets, trees, flowers, water, air that are owned by all of us. And when we allow a company to consume those things without some sort of compensation to all of us, it's not truly a capitalistic approach. So what these emission trading and carbon trading is actually doing is it's actually assigning some value to the common good and saying, because you are exceeding this level, you should be penalized for it, or you should have to pay to improve that. And it makes a lot of sense. If somebody comes on your property and cuts down 30 of your trees, fair compensation would be at least 30 trees, right? So it's that same sort of, I hate to use the word scheme, although the word scheme is used a lot when you talk about carbon credits, because it's an entire system, it's a systematic approach to solve a global issue. Shawn, what are your thoughts on that? I know Jack and I, we can talk forever. Let me, can you give us, can you summarize what we just said in the last 11 minutes, right?
I approach it from more the capitalist point of view. Because the altruism, that was a great description, by the way. The underlying goal of it is altruistic, right? It's to make everyone's lives better, to reduce emissions in the atmosphere, right? Affect global warming. But it creates a market for everyone to participate in. And that market is what we're really fascinated in. So these carbon credits now, as the market evolves, this is going to be a $1 trillion industry if it's not already. Yeah. It's becoming its own entity, for lack of a better term. So as companies, the best thing about the USA is they're the most innovative group of entrepreneurs ever to have walked the earth. So if there's a way to innovate for the collective good, to create carbon credits on a vast scale, someone's going to figure out how to do it. And if you end up transferring wealth from Exxon to this group of entrepreneurs and there's less carbon in the atmosphere, like, wow, everyone is a winner.
Absolutely. And I think that's really what it comes down to. I joke about this, but I'm very serious. I had some friends a couple of months back that are very hardcore environmentalists. We went out to dinner with them, and I happened to say at dinner, I said, have you heard there's this new carbon sequestering technology coming out of Israel, and within 5 years, they will be able to solve global warming, and will be able to pollute indefinitely with no damage to the environment. And they were just appalled by that. They were taken aback, and they were like, how dare they do something like that? And I said, wait a second. Now you know what your motivation is, because your motivation isn't solving the global problem. Your motivation is the cause, and you're unable to, a solution comes around and you're opposed to that. And I just said, look, you have to be able to think both ways. You have to be able to say it can be a combination of the two things together.
Yeah. So I would add this. So true environmentalism is solution-based approach.
Yes. It's not a cause-based thing. It's solutions-based. Yes.
So people tend to be left-leaning who are environmentalists, are leaning on regulation and government, and rules need to be applied. That is the most inefficient way to run anything. You need the capitalists. You need the free market to come up with innovative solutions. If they make dollars is beside the point. What you want to do is, what is our end result? Like, what are we actually solving? If you can pollute and negate the pollution of the atmosphere, like, you win.
Thank you both. Jack, Shawn, really appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate that. And hey, and for all of you that are that have listened to this episode, really appreciate you being here, listening about carbon credits and understanding how GHG emissions and our sponsor, Evergreen Carbon Credits, are coming together to create these easily accessible, easily purchasable NFT carbon credits. So you can check that out at evergreencarboncredits.com. And until next time, thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to The Convergence. If you want more information about the topics you've heard here today, reach out to us at theconvergencepodcast.com.